Tonight we have several news updates to discuss, including the health of Montreal Canadiens captain Shea Weber. We've had a lot of updates today on how long he's going to be out of action, so I want to discuss that. Plus, we also have an update on the Jeremy Roenick situation with NBC, and we have some signings to discuss as well involving the Leafs, Oilers, and Jets. We'll look at all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of news topics I want to discuss with you here this evening, so let's dive right in and get started. First of all, I want to cover off a few quick signings. Kick things off with the Winnipeg Jets. They announced earlier today that they've extended head coach Paul Maurice on a multi-year contract extension. I do think it's fair to say Maurice has had a really solid coaching career. He's done a great job with Winnipeg since he's been there, and this season has been especially challenging for him given everything the team has gone through since the offseason. So I think overall he certainly deserves some credit along with some of the team with how they've managed to get through and doing a half-decent season so far. So I do think it's a pretty solid move on the Jets' part to keep Maurice in the fold. I know there was some talk back probably about a month or two ago about the possibility that Maurice could become the first head coach for the new Seattle expansion franchise that's coming through here soon. Obviously, Maurice's contract was going to be expiring soon, and since an extension hadn't yet been announced, there was speculation that the Jets may head in a different direction and that Maurice might head over to Seattle. There's certainly a connection there between he and the Seattle GM Ron Francis, but obviously he's going to be sticking around with the Jets organization. I think it's a good move on their part, and I guess we'll see how they make out here in the future. Now, they also have a few other signings to discuss. The Edmonton Oilers have extended winger Joakim Nygard on a one-year deal, $875,000. He's had a pretty decent season for the Oilers, currently on injured reserve as of right now, but certainly worth keeping around for another season. The Swedish winger, like I said, has had a fairly productive year. They've been pleased with how he's made out with the Oilers this season, and certainly extending him on a fairly cheap contract is certainly worthwhile. And the Maple Leafs also announced an extension today. Of course, we've had a lot of smaller Leaf signings here in the last few weeks. They've extended center iceman Pierre Engvall to a 2-year contract extension, just over $1 million per season. Of course, he was called up from the Marlies earlier this year and has never really looked back. He's been a pretty solid member of the roster ever since. They've battled through enough injuries really throughout the year that he's created a bit of a spot for himself there with the Maple Leafs. So clearly, like I said, he's fit in nicely, been relatively productive, can play centers, played some on the wing as well, and is another pretty solid low-key signing for the Maple Leafs. They're going to need lots of forwards with cheaper contracts to level out the salary cap, and Engvall certainly appears to have found himself a spot here on the roster for the foreseeable future. Of course, as I mentioned, there's also finally been an update in the Jeremy Roenick situation with NBC Sports. He was suspended back a number of weeks ago after making comments on the Spit and Chicklets podcast about his co-workers in a sexual manner. Clearly, a lot of those comments were not well received. Considering how long it's been since we've had an update, many people figured that he likely would not be returning to NBC, but it has been officially confirmed that he has been let go and is officially gone from NBC altogether now. He released a video earlier today via Twitter explaining the situation. He would not be returning, but did say he would be back in some capacity. So I guess we'll see what comes next for JR in his media career, but clearly he's not afraid to speak his mind, made some inappropriate comments, and certainly paid the price. Now on to the hotter topic of the day, and that's the developing news on the injury situation with Montreal Canadiens captain Shea Weber. Now, a lot of this got started yesterday from information from Bob McKenzie on Twitter, which kind of got a lot of people talking. There's been other NHL insiders kind of chiming in here as well. But let's first take a look at what Bob McKenzie had to say first. McKenzie says on February the 11th, "I'm hearing the prognosis on Shea Weber's lower body injury is not at all encouraging in terms of him playing anytime soon. That said, other than saying he won't be in the Boston-Pittsburgh road trip and won't play any games this week, information from Montreal on Weber's health has been a lockdown. Weber had separate foot and knee surgeries prior to last season. Until this recent injury absence, Weber had been healthy this season and playing on a high level with 13 goals and 34 assists in 55 games, averaging a team high of more than 24 minutes of ice time per game. Oftentimes, when a player is sidelined for a week or more without a definitive prognosis or announcement from the club, it's because the doctors, club, or player are weighing the options, rehab versus surgery, etc., or getting additional medical opinions on what can be complicated injuries. Now, earlier today, we had another piece of information on Twitter from Darren Dreger indicating that Weber was seeing a specialist in Wisconsin. So clearly that got a lot of people speculating on who he might be seeing, because the doctor who performed his previous foot surgery was actually from there as well, and it did turn out to be the same doctor that he was visiting with here again. Now, what really got people talking and Habs fans fired up earlier was this tweet from Nick Kypreos earlier today. Nick Kypreos tweets, "Sources say Shea Weber injury has his season likely over and his future in question. Told injury is related to foot that was surgically repaired in 2018. While waiting for swelling to alleviate and further confirmation, surgery seemed unavoidable going into this week." Then later on, Montreal actually put out a press release of their own via Twitter. Here's what the Montreal Canadiens had to say. Montreal Canadiens say, medical update, Shea Weber expected to miss 4 to 6 weeks with an ankle sprain. And then we saw Nick Kypreos kind of double down with his take and mention the following. Hopeful for the Canadiens, Shea Weber fully recovers in 4 to 6 weeks, but I stand by my story that the Montreal Canadiens' concern going into this week was tendon related and not optimistic for his return. Long-term questions, I believe, remain. Of course, Nick Kypreos is a longtime NHL insider, former employee of Sportsnet, and then recently here, just before I started to record this video, former Sportsnet analyst and good friend of Nick Kypreos, Doug McLean, also chimed in on Twitter and indicated that he stands here with Nick Kypreos' information as well. So clearly there seems to be a divide on the injury, but I will caution you this, as obviously the Montreal is saying 4 to 6 weeks, and I honestly hope for Shea Weber's case that that's the case, and he can get back to playing here real soon. The Montreal Canadiens are still in a fight for a playoff spot, but if they gather up too many more losses here, it's going to be really, really difficult for them to make the playoffs. They already have a big mountain to climb, so it's certainly not going to be any easy task. The Montreal Canadiens also do have a history of not exactly being forthcoming or misdiagnosing injuries like we've seen with Shea Weber's previous stint where he had those 2 surgeries. Carey Price has gone through this. Look at the injuries earlier this year to Jonathan Drouin and Paul Byron. Both were deemed to be shorter term than what they ended up being. Well, the Habs organization do seem to be reluctant to release much information, and when they do, it's not always the most accurate sometimes on their players' health, and I'm not really sure if it's a reluctancy to be more forthcoming or if the doctors or staff or if the medical staff just underestimate. I really don't know what it is, but that seems to be a trend, as I mentioned here, with the Habs. And if you look at the calendar, clearly there's not that much time left in the season. We're kind of almost into the trade deadline. We're into the home stretch here. If you get a player diagnosed being out of action for about 6 weeks or so, that very well could end their season. Now, I understand from Montreal's perspective why they wouldn't come out and say Shea Weber gone for the year. They don't want to set off a panic. And clearly, from Montreal's perspective, that there's no guarantee that he's going to be out for the season. But if it gets to the point later in the year, over the next few weeks, if the Habs fall further out of the playoffs, and it's looking like the playoffs are not going to be happening for sure, why rush Shea Weber back with all of his history with just a matter of a week or 2 left in the season to get in a few games? That, to me, doesn't make sense. So I really do feel there's a really good likelihood that Shea Weber will not play again this season. But if Montreal stays in the playoff race and it comes down to it and he can fight back to get into the lineup in the last little while to help them for that push, I guarantee he will do everything in his power to do so. Shea Weber is a big part of the organization. He's an absolute beast. He's a really solid player, and I know he will play through whatever he can to help this team. But clearly there are some concerns moving forward for sure. Shea Weber has a lot of term left on his contract, still has 6 years left, and he has all these injuries. I do understand in a way where Kypreos was talking about his future. Now, he didn't say he was going to be forced into retirement or that his career was over or anything like that, but he did say that, if his question of his future for sure. So, really you see some of these guys have some of these injuries. They certainly do take their toll, and it's certainly debatable what the future does hold for Shea Weber. I mean, if it's really just an ankle sprain, it makes me wonder why he had to go to a specialist. Again, the same one he saw for the previous surgery. Just a lot of question marks, a lot of uncertainty, and it seems to be a difference of opinion from what the NHL insiders are getting from inside information compared to what the Habs are releasing. So certainly an unfortunate situation all around. Obviously, Weber being hurt right now is bad no matter how you shake it. I'm not really sure it's fair to say that his career is in question or in jeopardy or anything that severe. So I do understand why there's a bit of a backlash against Kypreos, but based on what McKenzie was saying, as well as some other insiders that have chimed in here today on Kyprios' comments, I do think there is reason to believe that there's more concern that they might be releasing here. So let me know your thoughts on the situation down below. Let me know what you think of these signings that happened earlier today with the Leafs, Oilers, and Jets. And let me know what you think of the Shea Weber's future in Montreal. Is 4 to 6 weeks a possibility for him to get back? And should they be concerned over his ability to play at a high level for the future and remainder of his current contract? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments and we'll continue the conversation. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.